Kia ora tātou everyone, and welcome to this edition of InFocus, a TLA podcast. I'm your host Michael Andrew, and each episode we will be sitting down and talking to an inspiring guest connected to the legal sector, listening to their stories as they share their experience, and in the process explore some of the significant work that is being done behind the scenes that impact the industry and our communities. It's a great honour to introduce my guest today, Samira Taghavi. Originally from Iran, Samira is a criminal barrister who represents clients from across New Zealand. She's also a member of the New Zealand Law Association Council and a tenacious political lobbyist who has successfully fought against various government proposals. Samira, thanks so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome, Michael.
Salam.
Salam.
Cheturi.
Khubam. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
That's the extent of my Farsi, and I practice those words over and over again on the car ride here.
Slightly disappointing, but
wow,
sure.
Damn it. No, I thought it was good. For those listeners that aren't linguists like me, those three words were hello.
Yes.
How are you?
Yes.
And I'm good.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there you go. That's all the words I know after 7 years of a relationship with an Iranian woman.
Have to talk to your wife.
Yeah, I do. yeah. I have to try harder. How you been?
Good. Very, very tired.
Yeah, busy?
Yeah, very, very busy. Yeah, but generally okay.
Wow. We're really grateful that you've come in here and put aside time in your busy schedule. I've wanted to chat with you for some time.
I know. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, it's great to have you in here, and we have a lot to talk about. What I want to start with is the inception of your law career in Iran.
Yeah.
And I guess how it started, where you grew up, what part of Iran you grew up. Yeah, just the whole background to your story, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do like to start from my high school kind of like term. I grew up in Mashhad, which is the second biggest city in Iran. My parents are from Tehran. But after my brother was born, who's older than me by 10 years, my dad was deployed to Mashhad as part of the army. And so I was born in Mashhad with my younger sister. And Dad was in the army. Then he studied law. He became a lawyer. And then eventually he was a judge. And then he returned to practice after a while because he just couldn't cope with the system as a judge. So I grew up in a non-religious family and non-practicing family in terms of practicing Islam. So, but Dad was slightly conservative as an Iranian father. So my mother was traveling a lot to the States because all my mom's family are in the United States. And she was away usually once every 2 years for 4 to 5 months. And I always remember that I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 5 or 6. And I used to play the lawyer role or a judge's role when I was so little with my younger sister. And she was always a defendant at the age of 3, poor thing. So when I wanted to go to high school, I told my dad that I wanted to do law. And he outright said no. So Iranian parents, your wife probably relate to that. They just want their kids to be either doctors or engineers.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything else is not acceptable. And my older sister, she's a doctor and she's a heart surgeon. So my dad was insisting he couldn't succeed with my brother. He just didn't budge, my brother. And then I was the third one. So he said, no, you're not doing law. My mother wasn't around at the time. And he said, you either have to you have to become a doctor and that's it. So I refused, basically. I said, I'm not going to school then. And during that time, I found a high school, which was quite a high-profile high school. They only started that high school, one in Tehran and one in Mashhad. And it was designed for students who wanted to get into law school. Only 80 students. They would accept only 80 students. It was a public school. I did my research, told my dad. He said, I'm not going to enroll you. So I said, that's fine. So I got one of my aunts. I've got 7 of them. I got one of them to enroll me. And my dad was quite surprised on the first day of school when I was going to school because he didn't know where I was going. Anyways, and then he became one of my biggest supporters towards the end of that 4 years of high school. And I managed to get into one of the best universities in Iran. It's quite different from New Zealand, the system in Iran. It's very, very, very hard to get into good universities. They're all public universities. And then I realized how political the whole legal system is. And you just can't stay away from the politics of everything, basically, when you're in law school. And my parents were always against me getting into politics.
Yeah.
Because my mother lost her young sister. She was only 25. And she was one of the 5,000 prisoners who were executed around at the beginning of the revolution because she was against the revolution. She was arrested as part of a big group, and she was kept in prison for 6 months. And then both her and her husband, they were both executed on one day as part of a very mass execution. So my mother always said, no politics, none of you getting close to politics. So it was a very big deal for her. But it was just impossible to stay away from politics, especially from the second year of university when we started doing criminal law. I just started realizing how corrupt the system was. And because my dad didn't do a lot of criminal cases, he was mainly a civil lawyer and a commercial lawyer. So when we started learning about stoning and death penalty, many other different types of penalties, which I'm actually kind of ashamed of mentioning them. They're that ridiculous, cutting hands, cutting feet, or blinding you, eye for an eye. And they do those things. It is still happening. And I always remember that it was on the second year of law school and I was getting really good grades. And to reward us, our lecturer arranged for 4 students who were doing so well in the school to go to Tehran and watch a live stoning of 2 men. So by that time, I only read about it. Okay? I never actually witnessed one. So I didn't know how it would happen in reality. So then it turned out that they actually advertised for it. So it was in a big intersection in a very busy, section of the city. And it was full of people, children. And the way they do it is that they get 120 lashes first, which you can imagine after that, your body is kind of lifeless. And then they would bury you up to your hip on the ground, and normal people start throwing stone at you. It took 5.5 hours for them to die.
Yeah.
So that's what we actually watched. I think I was only 19 or 19 and a half.
Yeah.
I can't exactly recall.
And so they deliberately took you there as part of, your curriculum.
Yeah.
Right.
That was like an activity. So I was really, really sick for 6 to 8 months. I was having really bad nightmares and basically constantly seeing my father and my brother every single night. My dad didn't know I went there for that reason. When he found out, he was just beside himself because he was so angry at me. But I was only 19. I thought, oh, how exciting. We're going there. But when I went through that 5.5 hours, I just thought to myself, there's nothing more barbaric than this. It's just looking at a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, picking up a stone and throwing it at a human being. For what? The charges and the convictions were for adultery.
Yeah.
So they didn't murder anybody. They didn't rape anybody. It was consensual sex between 2 adults.
Yeah.
But both parties were married. So after that, we started as a group of law students, we started doing a lot of research on the stoning and basically going through the whole Quran, reading it to see where in Quran it talks about the stoning, because the only thing we could find was if you want to execute somebody, it has to be in the easiest possible way.
Yeah.
And this was not it. And we started doing protests, we started having seminars, and then gradually the university started kind of like getting notification that they are causing a lot of trouble. And after that, of course, we started protesting against the death penalty. That was when I was in third year of law school, and then I got admitted and I was practicing as a lawyer. And I started working for a very high-profile criminal lawyer who was my father's friend. And my father was traveling a lot during that time, going to the States to either meet up with my mother's family or just do the things he was doing. So he was away for a while. And so when I started working for this lawyer, I realized how many wrongful convictions we've had.
Yeah.
And how the system is very different in Iran. So when you get a death penalty, they don't keep you in prison like America for 30 years before they execute you. You know, we had people who were executed whilst their appeal was still pending.
Right, okay.
Okay, so and these are the things that I could never get my head around it. And that's why I always debate with people who say, we support the death penalty. I am absolutely, utterly opposed to the death penalty, because no matter what the crime is, when you go through the death penalty, you're actually killing somebody on purpose. And unless someone goes through that process and, in my view, experience the process, well, let's put it this way. If you put them in that situation, because as a lawyer in Iran, it's your duty, you're obliged to be present during a client's execution. The execution, they're not always public executions. Most of them are private executions, which happens inside prison at 4 a.m. It's the worst time of the day. The lawyer is there, and you can imagine the terror.
Why 4 a.m?
It's just before they do the prayers at 5. That's why I am so... I'm not anti-Islam in a sense that, you know, I respect people who want to practice it, but because that's a memory I have, you know,
it's like taste in your
that's
mouth.
right.
Yeah.
So that's what they do. They start the prayers by killing somebody. It's just, it never made sense to me. And you have to be there, because in Iran, we have 2 types of penalties when you commit murder. Although we have a death penalty for all sorts of convictions, for rape, for drug, for even drinking, you know, not the first time or the second time. But you don't have life imprisonment in Iran. Okay, you either get the death penalty or you have to pay the blood money. And if you do pay the blood money, then you will get 10 to 20 years. But the only way you can give the blood money is if the deceased family actually say, we forgive you, and we don't seek the death penalty. And that rarely happens.
Yeah.
So it's just the worst thing you can go through as a 22-year-old, just standing there, because as a lawyer, it's your duty. You're there, the judge is there, the prosecutor is there, and the deceased family are there as well. So until the last minute that your client is standing on top of their little wooden chair, you know, before they put the noose around their head, around their neck, you are begging the family, please forgive them. So, but it's just I can't really express the feeling.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
just...
I can see. Yeah, I mean, like going through something like this, I can see why you would be motivated to extract yourself from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just horrific.
It was just absolutely horrific. So I was going through this over and over and over again, and we kept losing. You know, winning is very, very difficult in Iran.
Yeah.
In terms of wrongful convictions, and especially with girls who got raped and they basically killed the rapist and they got the death penalty. It was just getting too much.
Yeah.
But as part of our political beliefs, we kept thinking that we can change the system, being young, and, some people called us stupid. But then Nasreen, who was one of our mentors, she was fighting a good fight. She has been in prison now for 15 years. There was a documentary about her quite recently. So we kept thinking, if we do seminars after seminars, if we do protests, if we do strike, we can finally make a change.
Yeah.
But instead of making any changes, we kept getting arrested.
Yeah, right.
So we kept getting arrested, and it's not really the police which arrest you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a religious police.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
You don't know where you are.
My wife has talked about them.
Yeah. So you just don't know where you are because you're in a room in the middle of nowhere, 10 other people. Your family don't know where you are. It's but I was really, really hot-headed at the time. And I remember my mom locked me in the room once. And I got out of the window because I knew I got out through the window because I knew there was going to be a bigger strike. And I did come back home that day, I was very lucky because the regime decided to get rid of the protesters by spraying acid on the protesters.
Yeah, and
they didn't know what it was. We thought it was water.
Yeah.
And then when they started kind of saying, I'm burning, then we found out what actually they were doing. So it was just not sustainable. My dad had to come back a few times. I lost my passport. And I was getting more and more depressed because we couldn't make any changes. I was still doing these cases. We kept losing. I was still going through the whole rigmarole of watching the clients dying, basically. And one thing another point of a strike for us was that in the law, it said that you cannot execute anyone under the age of 18 because they didn't have the mental capacity, as an adult when they committed the crime. So we said, well, okay, that's great, because there were so many kids in prison. And at the age of 12 or 13, because they killed their very abusive step-parents or different reasons. But then I realized that they do keep them in prison until they're 18, and then they execute them.
Did you consider leaving the industry?
No. I never did.
Yeah.
No, I never did until the last time I was arrested, and I think that was in 2009. It was 2009. Yeah. It was 2008. And my dad had to come back. He was in Boston at the time. He had to come back and get me out, and he sat me down. And Iranian parents are very...
Did he have some kind of political influence because he was a judge?
That's right.
Yeah, right.
That's right. He was a very well-connected man.
Yeah.
And so he sat me down, and I was pretty bruised at the time because they don't treat you well at all. Okay, so they do all sorts of stuff when you're in custody. And he came back and he said, look, I just can't do this anymore. Yeah. Mom was getting very, very sick of it. And he said, you have two options, basically. You can either stop practicing or do something else, like civil or commercial, or you have to leave. Because I had the opportunity to leave when I was 17, and I outright refused because I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to change the world. You know how you are at that age. Yeah. And without realizing this is not going to get anywhere. And I had to think about it, and Iranian parents are quite strict, okay? And I knew he would really stop me from doing what I wanted to do there. And also I had to take into account their well-being. Mom was really doing badly mentally at the time, and she said to me, if it happens one more time, I'm just not going to survive that. So at that point, I decided that I would leave. Yeah. And I had the choice between New Zealand and the UK. I applied for both to do my master's. Managed to get my passport back eventually after God knows how long. And I came to New Zealand because I got an offer from Auckland University within 2 weeks to do my master's degree. And that's basically when I left. I did go back to Iran a couple of times. Yeah. Because I'm still consulting. So I went back for a couple of cases and also to see my parents. They didn't go very well. And then I haven't been back since basically 4 years ago. And I can't really go back, especially after the current movements that we were kind of, doing here in New Zealand. There's just no way that I can go back. So, yeah, that's basically my background. And I can tell you, going to court in Iran as a woman, it's the worst thing that can happen to you. I've heard it's slightly better now. That's what I've heard from friends who are practicing there. But at my time, there was not a single legally educated judge on the bench. Women cannot be judges in Iran at all. That hasn't changed. And in terms of men, they all come from a religious background. So they have no legal education whatsoever. And we don't have a jury in Iran. So everything is, everything gets decided by one person, a man, on the bench, and with no legal education. So there's no point in arguing anything legally in Iran.
Were you, when you first came here, was the transition quite overwhelming for you? Like, I guess the environment at Auckland University and the difference in approaches obviously would be very stark. What was your experience?
Look, Michael, I think I was very lucky. Okay, when I came here, my brother was also here, although they moved to Australia a year after I came to New Zealand. And my English wasn't good at all when I came to New Zealand. So I had an offer from Auckland Uni, but they said the offer is conditional if you finish they call it English Language Academy School, and you graduate with A+. And I had 6 months to do it. So when I came here, it was in the middle of winter. Everything and everywhere was closed at 4:30. It was just such a shock to my system.
And that was
2009.
Yeah. So.
And because of course I was coming from a very big family, always partying. Everywhere was open until 2 in the morning. It was just such a shock to my system.
My wife's parents had the same experience, but in the 80s.
Oh my God, even worse.
86.
Yeah.
When it was like they'd come to the frontier, like the last outpost on Earth.
Oh my God.
The transition from being in such a lively community where things are open at night and everyone's out on the street to this place where you couldn't even get
you couldn't go anywhere.
And there was no food apart from like the most boring of kind of
I can imagine it was much
food.
worse. So I was quite lucky to have my brother and my sister-in-law here, and I was with them for a couple of months before, and I was going to that little language academy school in town, and then I decided that they were speaking Farsi at home, and I really needed to work on my English because it was very expensive. It was like 2009, I think it was around $35,000 to do your master's degree, and I really couldn't fail. So I decided that I would move out in flat, actually in town, and my dad still doesn't know, but I started working because he never wanted me to work. He's quite wealthy, and he said that you don't need to work, you just focus on your study. But it was so important for me to be independent because we never had that independence back home in Iran. They just think they have to look after you no matter what. But I decided to start working as a barista at a cafe to improve my English, which was probably the best thing I've ever done. And things started... I must say I was quite homesick for the first 4 to 5 months, and I kept feeling like a failure, that I left everything behind, everyone else has stayed. And in the meantime, I lost a couple of friends. They were released from prison, and then one of them committed suicide. The other one died as a result of a stroke. So it was just very, very hard in the first few months. But when I got to university and I started kind of like hanging out with, I have so many German friends because it was the time that a lot of German students were doing the master's degree here in New Zealand. And things started picking up from there. And to be honest, I really consider myself as being very, very lucky career-wise because I never had to look for a job.
Yeah.
And I got my first job. It just was offered to me because my classmate was a criminal lawyer. She was doing her master's degree. She was so bad at research. And she said, do you want to work for me? Initially, I said, no, I'm so busy studying. And then she asked me again a month later. She said, I'll give you an office. You can stay there. You can just do my research and work for me and do your thesis. And I said, well, why not? And that was really a starting point for me. And I am quite a social person. So I was never shy in terms of talking to people or approaching people. And through her, I got to know a lot of lawyers. And then I ended up with Patrick in 2011 because they were working on a Bill of Rights project. And I was very interested. And things just started moving forward and rather fast.
Yeah, and the rest is history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what was that experience like, I guess, having that background, practicing in Iran and then practicing after you finished your master's here? Was it quite a palpable comparison for you? Like, I can only imagine that time has passed, but if you put the two experiences side by side, was it quite a very notable experience for you?
Absolutely. And I think practicing in Iran, and I always tell people, because I see that, especially the younger generation, they get very flustered in court with the most minimal, sometimes criticism or sometimes a constructive criticism. And I don't deny the fact that there is bullying on the bench or by other more senior lawyers or just in general. But I think coming from that background puts things for me in perspective. I always say that I have never, ever experienced bullying from the bench.
Yeah.
Maybe because, I'm coming from that background and I've seen what bullying actually
context
is.
For you, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because bullying for me was going to court and being told, where is the lawyer? And I'm saying, well, I'm here. No. Where is your principal? Where is the guy?
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm representing the client. And they wouldn't deal with me. They would say, no, you have to go and get, you got to go home and you got to look after your kids. And so I don't have kids. And judges would throw things at you, I think it's much better now in Iran. But that's the experience I was coming from.
Yeah.
And a judge losing his or her patience on the bench, or saying something sarcastic really doesn't bother me. And I usually just look at them and I say, well, that's sad. You're not having a good day. But it really did put things in perspective. But I also, at the same time, I feel I'm a little bit out of touch with kind of like how lawyers sometimes feel in terms of being bullied or being belittled in court, because I feel it's not a big deal. But at the same time, I have to make sure, especially now that I'm mentoring, I've got junior lawyers, I've got to make sure that I'm not dismissing, how they feel. So I've been trying to pay more attention to that, because for me, nothing is a big deal, really.
Yeah.
For me, as long as your client is not getting executed, anything else can be handled.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
Exactly. So that's how I feel.
Yeah. And I guess that must help you be really resilient when you're working through cases and dealing with clients as well, right? Because I guess in some ways the outcomes for those clients are not as severe or life-threatening as they would have been in what you've experienced back in Iran. So the gravities of the situations are not as extreme, and that might make it easier, I think, to work with them and I maybe help them hold on to
that's right.
and view them with a bit of strength too.
That's true. Although I must say, with cases, some of the cases that, of course, carries up to 20 years imprisonment.
Of course, there's still
serious consequences for them.
And working in what you do, and really serious criminal law.
That's right.
Not taking away the severity of the sentence. So
that's right. But it's still, I know my client is going to live. I know my client is not going to prison with 10 other prisoners in a room, who will be. I know my client is not going to get raped. I had a client that when she was in custody, she was only 14, during the time that she was in custody, she gave birth twice because she kept getting raped by prison guards and nobody was taking responsibility, and they allow you to have your kids with you in prison. So we had so many women in prison at young ages that they were raped and they were raising the kids when they were in prison. God. So the reality is really, really grim.
Yeah.
Grim in Iran. But as I said, it does put things in perspective for me to a point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just the main thing, because I know even if we have clients who end up in jail, I know They get 3 meals a day, they've got their own room, and it's horrible to be in prison. But still, they're going to be alive and they're going to live.
Do you have any moments in particular that stand out for you in terms of your practice here in New Zealand that are really satisfying, or something that I guess has been a really fulfilling case that you've worked on, or a piece of work?
I can't really refer to a case because, I find all our cases reasonably fulfilling. But what really is fulfilling for me is the lobbying work that we do in terms of fundamental rights and freedom. And the most fulfilling experience of my career and life here in New Zealand was the win we had back in 2014 when we convinced the majority, well, they weren't majority, I think it wasn't majority national, but they were in government, and they were going to pass the Criminal Procedure Act at the time, basically taking away the right to silence. They wanted to adopt the UK model, that if you don't say anything, it will be used against you in court, whereas at the moment we have, you don't have to say anything, and that cannot be used against you, which is a fundamental right, presumption of innocence and right to silence. And I fought for 2 years with a group of lawyers, and we basically lobby every single MP, ACT, Labour, Green, Māori, and National Party. That's how I started my political kind of like career back in, and I was very young. I was not a resident, and I had to go through a lot of anxiety actually picking up the phone and calling these people. But the best moment was when Simon Power basically accepted defeat and accepted in Parliament and the House that I am removing that section if I can get this passed. And all those finalist speeches, and then because I basically rewrote the Criminal Procedure Act for them. You have to do the work for these politicians, okay? And they adopted the wording we have suggested, and they said that's fine. 2.5 years later, we just, you win, basically. That was really the most gratifying experience that I have had in New Zealand, and I continued with that. So we still do a lot of lobbying work.
What made you get into that? I mean, I'm sure you had
did.
Okay.
Patrick, because I was looking for a full-time job, and I was told that Patrick Winkler at the time, he was looking for a part-timer to help with a project, a Bill of Rights project. And I really needed a full-time job because my boss at the time, she was just working crazy hours. I was there from 7, and sometimes I wouldn't finish until 4 a.m. because she was coming to the office quite late. And I didn't mind it. I think that's a time between your 20 and 40. This is the time you really want to, pick up your career. And I really didn't mind working. But they said that he's got this project on. So they called me after seeing my CV and my background. And I started working on the project with them because they've already started the work. And I found it fascinating. They had really good lawyers on the team. And it grew and grew and grew. And that's how I got into it, basically. And it was really one of the best experiences of my life. And I kept those relationships in the past 12 years.
Yeah.
And one of the things that people say to me, sometimes they say, we just don't know which way you are swinging. Okay, are you right? Are you left? Are you far right? Are you far left? And because I communicate with all different parties.
Yeah.
I've got friends, within all different parties, and I know them. I chat with them. I socialize with them. And I say when it comes to law and fundamental rights, it doesn't matter which party is in charge. It doesn't matter who they are. Okay, you got to fight them, whether it's Labour, National, Green, or Māori, or ACT Party. If they're not doing the right thing, you got to fight against it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because they know that.
Yeah.
So, and I will continue doing the lobbying work. I absolutely love it.
You sound like you're the right person to take on that type of work.
Yeah, and I love it. I really,
tenacity.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy it. Because when we were doing the criminal procedure lobbying, I wanted to get a hold of John Boscawen, who was the ACT Party president. He was the only person that I still haven't been able to talk to. And their role was very, very crucial. Yeah. Okay, because we only needed them to stand against it with Labour and Green at the time to be able to win. So And I already spoke with Hilary Calvert and a few other MPs within the ACT, but they said the decision is up to John. And I remember that I kept emailing his secretary at the time, PA, and she said, I will pass it on to John. I will pass it on to John. So basically, I was sending her 2-3 emails a day. And I always remember that I suddenly received an email from her, and John Boscawen was CC'd. So obviously, I was not the intended recipient of that email. She mistakenly CC'd me in the email. And she basically said to John, look, I can't cope with her anymore. She's calling me and texting me and emailing me.
You're just cold calling and
every
harassing
day.
them,
Yes.
basically.
And I'm not going to deal with her anymore. You can contact her, and I'm going to tell her that she can contact you. She's such a bulldog. So it was actually quite funny. And then she realized that she sent it to me. So she was trying to recall it. And you know, with the recall email, it just makes it worse. You keep getting it over and over again. And
you weren't offended, though.
I wasn't offended at all.
Of course you
and
were.
that is actually now my nickname amongst all the MPs.
Yeah.
So when I want to contact them, as soon as I say bulldog here, they know who I am. Because
is that on your email signature?
That's in my email bio. Yeah. And so then I emailed both of them within 5 minutes, and I said, thank you, I love my nickname. And she was very apologetic, poor girl, but I really wasn't offended. And then John immediately emailed and said, you can have 5 minutes. And we went to the ACT Party office at the time, which was I think it was in Epsom, Newmarket, Epsom, yeah. And thankfully, John was very hungry. So we went upstairs. He said, you've got 5 minutes, but I'm really hungry. And I said, well, how about we go downstairs and we just grab something to eat? He said, oh, that's a good idea. So my 5 minutes turned into an hour and a half because I kept buying him muffins. So he had around 3 muffins or 2 muffins. He was probably going to listen to this. And, you know, I got an hour and a half out of an ACT Party president at the time, and it was the best meeting I had. And he became... And John had no idea at the time what we were talking about, but then he educated himself about it, and he made one of the best speeches against actually that, because ACT Party is quite serious about law and order.
Yeah.
They're quite tough when it comes to law and order, and he was really tough as well. But he really listened in terms of why this right is so fundamental, what the consequences would be, and he listened, and they took our side. And they formed, I always remember, I don't know whether you remember Charles Chevelle. He was a Labour Justice spokesperson at the time we were actually lobbying. And Rodney Hyde was, of course, part of the ACT Party. And the tension between Labour and ACT is always very kind of, you know, they're always fighting. And I always remember that Charles Chevelle sent me a message one night, and he said, for the first time in the history, a Labour MP has received a message from an ACT MP saying, have a good night. He said, I'm pretty sure it's the first time we also agree on something. We're actually fighting against the same thing. So these are the moments that I really always remember. Yeah. And we carried on with a few other legislation. Of course, you can't always have the same success.
But that stands out for you.
That's right. Yeah. Because I don't, that's one of the reasons I don't like majority government. Okay? Because I think they can do a lot of damage.
Yeah. So if you've got more parties to work with,
that's
you can influence more change.
Right.
And
that's absolutely
you've got more people to call and harass. That's right. That's absolutely right. You can just turn people against each other, basically. It's easier to do that. So, and I love that work. It will never stop. Yeah. I will always carry on doing that because it's so important, especially when you come from a country with no rule of law. Yeah. You really value the rule of law. That's something I will always fight for. And I don't think there's nothing but the rule of law, basically. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
Thanks so much for sharing such in-depth detail about your background. And it's obviously really heavy, but what you went through has informed who you are and how you operate today, which is very valuable. And so, we really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Yeah, thanks
Always
for coming
happy to share more.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Michael.
No worries. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. Subscribe to InFocus, a TLA podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to connect with the Law Association, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, X or Instagram, or visit our website, thelawrassociation.nz. Mā te wā.